The year is 793 AD. On the holy island of Lindisfarne, off the coast of Northumbria, the dawn breaks in serene tranquility. Within the stone walls of the monastery, monks glide through the cloisters, their peaceful morning chants echoing in the still air. A lone monk, Brother Cuthbert, pulls the rope of a small bell, its gentle chime calling his brethren to prayer, unaware of the approaching storm. Out on the placid North Sea, a thick fog clings to the horizon. But something stirs within the mist. A dark shape. The menacing silhouette of a dragon-headed prow tears through the white veil. It is followed by another, and then another. A fleet of Viking Longships moves with silent, deadly purpose toward the shore, their oars dipping into the water in a single rhythmic motion. The age of peace is about to end. With savage roars that rip through the morning calm, the Vikings storm the beach. They are a force of nature, brutal, swift, and utterly merciless. The monks, who have known nothing but peace, scatter in pure terror, their sacred hymns turning to desperate screams. The raiders, led by a fearsome axe-wielding chieftain, descend upon the sanctuary. The sacred halls become a scene of carnage. The Vikings ransack the monastery, their axes splintering ancient wood and stone. They tear priceless jewels from holy books, smash ornate relics, and cut down any monk who dares to stand in their path. The air fills with the smoke of burning scriptures and the clash of steel against stone, a violation of this holy ground. As dusk falls, the longships pull away from the smoldering ruins, their hulls heavy with gold, silver, and terrified captives. On the blood-soaked shore, a single wounded monk watches them go, his face a mask of horror. As the dragon prows disappear back into the fog from which they came, he knows the world has changed forever. On that day, a new and terrible force was unleashed upon Europe, and the age of the Vikings had begun in blood and fire. The year is 795 AD. On the windswept shores of Rathlin Island, a lone monastery stands as a bastion of knowledge. This is the height of Ireland's golden age, a time when Irish monks are the keepers of Western civilization, their hands painstakingly copying the great works of scripture and learning by the flickering light of candles. Far from the turmoil of mainland Europe, these isolated communities are beacons of peace and scholarship. But a shadow is falling upon this tranquil world. Under the cover of a moonless night, the sleek, dark shapes of longships slice through the waters of a secluded bay. These are Norwegian raiders, their crews hardened by the unforgiving North Sea. With muffled oars dipping silently into the cold Atlantic, they approach the coast, unseen and unheard, their dragon-prowed vessels like specters gliding through the mist. Suddenly, the night is torn apart. Warriors leap from their ships into the churning surf, their grim silhouettes lit by the fiery glare of torches. They storm the dew-soaked shores with a brutal efficiency. Their target, the unsuspecting monastic settlement, nestled on the cliffs above. They are predators drawn to the scent of wealth, moving with a swift and deadly purpose towards the heart of the sacred community. The hallowed peace of the monastery is shattered by the crash of splintered doors and the terrified shouts of monks. The Vikings are not here for land, but for plunder. They storm the stone chapel, seizing jewel-encrusted shrines, silver chalices, and ornate book covers. Monks who are not cut down are bound and dragged towards the ships, their fate sealed for the slave markets of the north. The annals of Ulster would later record this brutal event, marking the burning of Retru as the first violation of their sacred shores. As dawn breaks, the longships melt back into the morning mist, leaving behind a scene of devastation and smoldering ruins. The raid is over, but a new era has just begun. These violent hit-and-run attacks were the terrifying prologue to 2 centuries of conflict and change, a period that would ultimately see these Viking invaders establish the very first towns and cities on Irish soil. The year is 834 AD. In the green fields of Vestfold, Norway, a crowd gathers not for a launch but for a burial. A massive trench has been dug, and within it rests the magnificent Oseberg ship, a 21.5-meter-long vessel crafted not for the brutalities of war, but as a breathtaking symbol of power and prestige. Its final journey will be into the earth itself. Carved from solid oak, the prow and stern spiral into the fierce head and elegant tail of a mythical serpent. Intricate patterns of the gripping beast style adorn its surfaces, a writhing, complex tapestry of intertwined animal figures that seem to pulse with a life of their own. A solemn procession approaches, carrying the bodies of 2 women. One is elderly, a powerful queen who lived into her 80s. the other a younger companion chosen to accompany her into the next life. They are carefully laid within a specially constructed timber burial chamber, a house for the dead built just behind the ship's mast, signifying their high status. The vessel is then filled with a king's ransom in treasures, everything the queen might need for her journey into the afterlife. Ornately carved wooden sleighs, a richly decorated cart, menacing animal head posts with snarling faces, and finely made beds and chests are placed aboard. Sacrificed horses and dogs are also included, loyal servants ready to serve their mistresses for eternity. Finally, the monumental task of sealing the tomb begins. Hundreds of people work tirelessly, hauling stones and turf to construct a massive burial mound over the ship. This earthen seal would protect the vessel and its contents from the ravages of time, preserving them almost perfectly for over 1,000 years. It is this act of burial that would provide future generations with the single richest glimpse into the art, life and beliefs of the Viking world. The year is 844 AD. On the banks of the Guadalquivir River, the city of Ishbilia, known today as Seville, thrives as a jewel of Moorish Al-Andalus. Under a warm Iberian sun, its markets are alive with trade and its mosques echo with calls to prayer. But this tranquil scene is about to be shattered. A horrifying vision appears on the water, a fleet of nearly 100 Viking longships, their iconic dragon prows slicing through the river, an omen of the chaos to come. These Norsemen, called Magus or fire worshippers by the Arab chroniclers, crash ashore with terrifying speed. Their ferocity catches the city's defenders completely off guard. With a roar, they breach the walls and pour into the prosperous streets, beginning a week of relentless destruction. The Vikings sack everything in their path, looting palaces and desecrating mosques, their brutal campaign unfolding under the relentless Spanish sun. Word of the catastrophe races to the Emir of Cordoba, Abd al-Rahman II. Enraged, he does not hesitate. A disciplined professional army is dispatched with orders to reclaim Seville at all costs. The elite Umayyad cavalry thunders across the plains, supported by infantry carrying a fearsome weapon. Naphtha, a flammable liquid akin to Greek fire, designed to burn on water. Outside the ravaged city, at the Battle of Tablada, the two armies collide. The Viking shield wall holds firm against initial assaults, a near-impenetrable barrier of wood and steel. But the battle turns when the Umayyad forces unleash their secret weapon. Siege engines hurl pots of flaming naphtha, which explode against the Viking longships. Fire engulfs the fleet, spreading panic and disarray through the Norse ranks. Outmaneuvered and with their escape route ablaze, the Viking force is systematically crushed. The aftermath is grim. As a stark warning, captured raiders are hanged from the palm trees of Seville. Though the raid was a disaster for the city, the Emir's decisive victory was a turning point. It spurred the creation of a powerful new fleet and coastal defenses, ensuring that a Viking attack of this magnitude would never again threaten the heart of Al-Andalus. The year is 845 AD. On the morning of Easter, the Seine River groans under the weight of a ghost forest. Her fleet of 120 Viking longships, a sight of unprecedented terror, slices through the water. Their dragon-headed prows aimed squarely at the heart of Francia, Paris. This is the largest army of Northmen to ever invade the kingdom, and at its helm is a chieftain whose name is already legend, Ragnar Lothbrok. King Charles the Bald, ruler of West Francia, scrambles to defend his capital. He masses his army, but in a fatal tactical blunder divides his forces, positioning them on opposite banks of the Seine. Ragnar, a master of strategy, sees the opening instantly. The Vikings swarm one half of the Frankish army, overwhelming and annihilating it as their comrades watch in horror from the other side, unable to intervene. The Frankish defense had been shattered before it even truly began. To utterly break the will of the remaining soldiers, Ragnar orchestrates a spectacle of pure terror. On a small island in the Seine, in full view of the surviving Frankish contingent, he orders more than 100 captured soldiers to be hanged from the trees. It is a mass sacrifice to the Norse god Odin. The grisly display achieves its purpose. The Frankish army dissolves, its soldiers fleeing in panic. With the defenders gone, the path to Paris is wide open. The Vikings land on the Ile de la Cité and find the city almost completely abandoned. They pour through the gates, a tide of violence and greed. The city's rich churches and monasteries are plundered, their sacred treasures stripped and their halls set ablaze. Smoke and the screams of the few who remained behind fill the air as the Vikings sack the jewel of Francia. His army defeated and his capital in flames, King Charles the Bald is left with a single desperate option. In a humiliating negotiation, he agrees to pay Ragnar's price, a staggering 7,000 French livres of silver and gold. The Vikings load their longships with the immense treasure and sail away, leaving a smouldering city and a broken king. Charles had just paid the very first Danegeld in Frankish history, a ransom that, instead of ensuring peace, would echo as an open invitation for future raids. The autumn of 865 AD, a sight England had never witnessed. Not a fleet of longships on a summer raid, but a vast armada beaching on the shores of East Anglia. This was no fleeting attack. This was an army, a coalition of Scandinavian warriors, thousands strong, drawn from across the Viking world. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle would give them a name that would echo through history: the Meixel Heathen here, the Great Heathen Army. Instead of scattering to plunder, the army showed a terrifying new discipline. They established a fortified camp, a base for a long campaign. This was a force with a singular, chilling purpose: not loot, but land. At their head were the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, led by the cunning Ivar the Boneless. A shrewd tactician carried upon his shield, his sharp eyes already plotting the downfall of kingdoms. They came seeking vengeance for their father, executed by the King of Northumbria. Faced with this overwhelming force, the local ruler, King Edmund of East Anglia, made a pragmatic but fatal choice. He offered the Vikings horses in exchange for a temporary peace. It was a deal that sealed his kingdom's fate. We see the Viking host transform, their infantry becoming a mobile mounted force, granting them an immense strategic advantage. Their reach and speed were now unparalleled. Their winter camp was secure, their army now mounted. East Anglia was merely a staging ground. The storm was gathering, and the disparate Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex were fractured and utterly unprepared for this new scale of invasion. The old rules of war had been broken, and a new, more brutal era was dawning. As spring approached, the great heathen army thundered out of their camp. A massive force of mounted warriors, their target set, north towards the kingdom of Northumbria. This was the first step in a war of conquest that would rage for years, topple two English kingdoms, and ultimately set the stage for the desperate defiance of Alfred the Great. This was the beginning of the end for Anglo-Saxon England as it had been known. After a harsh winter in East Anglia, a new season for war had arrived. The great heathen army turned its eyes north, marching towards a land ripe for the picking. The Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria was tearing itself apart, locked in a bitter civil war between two rival kings, Ella and Osbert. For the opportunistic Vikings, this internal conflict was an invitation. On the holy day of All Saints, November the 1st, 866, the Vikings launched their audacious assault. The Northumbrian capital, Eoforwic, was preoccupied with religious festivities, its defenses lax and its people distracted. The great army stormed the city, meeting little resistance. The ancient Roman walls that had stood for centuries could not protect a kingdom divided against itself. Eoforwic fell with shocking swiftness, becoming a fortified Viking stronghold. Faced with a common enemy occupying their capital, the feuding kings, Ella and Osbert, finally set aside their differences. They forged a desperate alliance, uniting their armies to reclaim what was lost. In March of 867, their combined force arrived at the gates of York, ready to drive the invaders out. The stage was set for a decisive, bloody confrontation. The Northumbrians managed to breach a section of the crumbling Roman walls, pouring into the city with cries of vengeance. But their initial success was a carefully laid illusion. The Vikings, led by the cunning Ivar the Boneless, feigned a retreat, luring the Anglo-Saxon warriors deep into the labyrinthine streets. Suddenly, the trap was sprung. The Vikings turned, launching a ferocious counterattack that surrounded their pursuers. The battle turned into a massacre. Trapped and disoriented, the Northumbrian army was annihilated. Both King Ella and his rival Osbert were slain, their forces utterly destroyed. In the aftermath, the Vikings secured their prize, renaming the city Jorvik. It was no longer just a captured prize, but the capital of a new Viking kingdom in England, a permanent foothold that would change the course of history. 71 AD. For the Anglo-Saxons of Wessex, it is the beginning of the end. The great heathen army, a vast Viking host, has already devoured the kingdoms of Northumbria and East Anglia. Now it stands poised to swallow the last bastion of Saxon freedom. This single brutal year will be known as the Year of Battles, a desperate struggle for the very soul of a nation yet to be born. At the Battle of Ashdown, the West Saxon army teeters on the edge of annihilation. While King Ethelred remains in his tent, lost in prayer, his younger brother Alfred knows that heaven will not wait. Taking command, the young prince leads a ferocious uphill charge, likening himself to a wild boar crashing into the Viking shield wall. His raw courage shatters the enemy line, snatching an improbable victory from the jaws of defeat. But one victory cannot win a war. The Saxons are bled white in a relentless series of clashes at Basing and then Merton. The fighting is savage and attritional, and the kingdom's strength wanes with every shield broken and every warrior lost. In the bloody aftermath, King Ethelred succumbs to his wounds, leaving a shattered realm behind. A heavy crown is thus placed upon the head of Alfred, just 22 years old. He inherits not a kingdom but a ruin. Its army is a ghost, its treasury empty, and the victorious Viking army remains camped deep within its heartland. The weight of a dying nation rests on his young shoulders. Facing impossible odds, Alfred makes a painful choice. He pays the Vikings to leave, a humiliating truce that buys him not peace but time. This is no surrender. It is the first move in a much longer game. As the Vikings withdraw, a new chapter begins for the young king. He would be pushed to the very brink, a fugitive in the marshes of his own land. It is in this crucible of despair that Alfred the guerrilla will be forged, mastering the strategies that will one day save England and earn him the name the Great. He had been a king without a kingdom, a fugitive hiding in the marshlands of Athelney. But in the spring of 878, King Alfred of Wessex was done hiding. From the desolate swamps, messengers rode out carrying a summons. To the Firds of Somerset, Wiltshire and Hampshire, the call was clear. Rally to Expert's Stone. The king had returned. Across the lands of Wessex, a silent determination took hold. Farmers left their fields, blacksmiths their forges. They were not professional soldiers, but men with everything to lose. Grasping spears, axes, and hunting bows, they answered the summons, flocking to their king's banner. For the first time in years, a great West Saxon army was on the move, marching with a speed and secrecy that would stun their enemy. Under a leaden, rain-soaked sky, at a place called Eddington, Alfred's hope met its ultimate test, the full might of Guthrum's great Viking army. Two colossal shield walls formed, stretching across the muddy fields. The air grew thick with tension, filled only with the pounding of hearts and the taunts shouted across the deadly space between them. Then, with a sound like thunder, the walls crashed. The world dissolved into a brutal, slow-motion ballet of violence. Axes shattered wooden shields into splinters. Spear points darted through gaps, seeking flesh. Rain and mud mixed with blood as the two lines pushed, heaved, and hacked in a desperate, grinding struggle that lasted for hours. This was not a battle of tactics, but of pure, unyielding endurance. Finally, driven by the ferocious will of men defending their last patch of earth, the Saxon line surged forward. A crack appeared in the Viking wall, then it shattered completely. Panic erupted as the fearsome invaders broke and fled. Alfred's army gave no quarter, pursuing the fleeing Danes all the way to their fortress at Chippenham. The siege began, a final act that would not only seal a legendary victory, but also forever change the destiny of England. For decades, the name Rollo was a curse on the lips of the Franks. His Viking Longships owned the River Seine, a serpent of terror striking deep into the heart of West Francia. He and his Northmen had raided with impunity, even laying siege to the great city of Paris. The kingdom was bleeding, its people living in constant fear and its king powerless to stop the onslaught. King Charles the Simple, ruler of a fractured realm, knew he could not defeat the Viking chieftain in open battle. His armies were exhausted, his treasury drained, so he devised a radical solution, a gambit that would change the course of European history. If you can't beat your enemy, make him your ally. He sent an envoy to Rollo with an unprecedented offer. At the small town of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, the two leaders met. Charles proposed a deal. Rollo would be granted all the land from the river Epte to the sea, a rich and fertile territory. In return, the Viking had to do three things: swear an oath of fealty to Charles, convert to Christianity, and most crucially, become the Shield of Francia, defending its northern coast and the Seine from all other raiders. Rollo agreed, but one final detail remained: the act of homage. The proud Viking was told he must kiss the king's foot. He flatly refused. Instead, he ordered one of his warriors to perform the rite. The burly Viking, seeing the act as beneath him, strode forward, seized the king's foot and yanked it up to his mouth without bending down. King Charles tumbled backward off his throne, much to the roaring laughter of the assembled Northmen. The deal, however, was sealed. Rollo was baptized with the Christian name Robert, becoming the first duke of his new domain. This territory would soon become known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. The very raiders who had once bled the kingdom now became its staunchest defenders. These Vikings would lay down their axes for plows, their longships becoming the foundation of a powerful new duchy. And in time, their descendants, the Normans, would not only protect France, but would set their sights across the Channel and conquer England itself. In the late 9th century, a new story began on a remote volcanic island. Rugged Viking settlers, fleeing the iron fist of Norway's King Harald Fairhair, landed on the shores of Iceland. They sought freedom in this vast empty land, building farmsteads and carving out new lives. But without a king and without common law, freedom quickly soured. Disputes were settled not with words, but with the sharp edge of an axe, and blood feuds threatened to tear their fragile society apart. Realizing they could not survive on violence alone, the Icelanders sought a better way. A wise chieftain named Ulfljótur was dispatched to Norway not for conquest but for knowledge. He returned with a legal code, carefully adapted for their new home. To enact this law, a central meeting place was needed. They chose Thingvellir, a breathtaking rift valley where the great tectonic plates of North America and Eurasia pull apart, a fitting stage for a nation to be forged. In the summer of 930 AD, a great migration began. From every corner of the island, chieftains and their followers embarked on arduous journeys, traveling for weeks on horseback and on foot. They converged on Thingvellir, transforming the green valley into a bustling temporary city of turf shelters and canvas tents, a vibrant hub of trade, kinship, and anticipation. At the heart of this gathering stood the Lögberg, the law rock. Here the law speaker, the most revered legal mind in Iceland, took his place. He did not read from a scroll, but recited 1/3 of the nation's laws from memory, his powerful voice echoing across the natural amphitheater. This oral tradition ensured the law was a living thing, held in the collective mind of the people. This assembly was the Althing, the world's first national parliament. Here new laws were debated, alliances were forged through marriage, and bitter disputes were resolved through legal argument, not bloodshed. It was a revolutionary declaration, not a gathering to crown a monarch, but to proclaim that the law itself was king, laying the foundation for a unique Icelandic commonwealth that would endure for centuries. In the year 941 AD, a storm was gathering on the Black Sea. Over 1,000 longships, a vast armada of the Russes led by the ambitious Igor of Kiev, sliced through the waves. Their target was no mere town, but the greatest prize in the known world, Constantinople, the city they called Miklagard. The timing was perfect. The Byzantine capital was caught completely unprepared, its formidable army and navy engaged with Arab forces far to the east. As Igor's fleet made landfall in the province of Bithynia, his warriors swarmed into the wealthy, undefended suburbs. A brutal reign of terror began as they plundered and burned, their victory seemingly assured. The heart of the empire lay exposed and vulnerable. Scrambling to mount a defense, the Byzantine Emperor Romanos II Lecapenus assembled a pathetic-looking force. Just 15 old retired dromons were all he could muster. Against the 1,000-strong Russ's fleet, it looked like a suicidal gesture, but these aging vessels carried the empire's most fearsome and closely guarded secret. As the confident Russ rowed towards the city's sea walls for the final assault, the small Byzantine squadron sailed out to meet them. Suddenly, from bronze siphons mounted on their prows, jets of liquid fire erupted across the water's surface, a terrifying, unnatural spectacle. This was Greek fire, an incendiary chemical weapon. Its horrific genius was that water could not extinguish it. In fact, water seemed only to make it burn hotter. The wooden longships were instantly engulfed in an unstoppable inferno. The sea itself appeared to be on fire. Panic shattered the Russ lines as warriors in heavy armor leaped overboard, only to be consumed by the flames or dragged to the depths. What was meant to be a glorious conquest turned into a scene from hell. The technologically superior Byzantine force utterly annihilated the massive fleet. Igor of Kiev himself barely escaped with a handful of ships, a humbled leader fleeing a supernatural horror. The memory of the burning sea was seared into the minds of the Rus, a devastating defeat that would haunt them for generations. In the late 10th century, one man's violent temper would lead him to the edge of the known world and into the pages of history. This is the story of Erik Thorvaldsson, a Norseman better known as Erik the Red. Exiled first from Norway for manslaughter, Erik's life in Iceland proved no less turbulent. After killing again over a dispute, he was declared an outlaw and banished from Iceland for 3 years. With no home left in the civilized world, Erik faced a choice: accept his fate or sail into the unknown. He chose the latter, remembering old sailors' tales of a vast landmass sighted west of Iceland. In 982 AD, with a loyal crew and a sturdy longship, he set a course west, into the icy grip of the North Atlantic. After a grueling voyage through treacherous waters, land appeared on the horizon. Erik's ship navigated a maze of towering icebergs under a pale sun. He stood on the prow, a figure of grim determination, staring at a coastline dominated by immense glaciers and a colossal ice sheet. It was a world of ice, stark and forbidding, yet he pressed on. For 3 years, Erik and his men explored this harsh new land. They discovered that while the interior was a frozen wasteland, the southwestern coast held a surprise. During the brief summer, long deep fjords burst into life, their shores surprisingly green and fertile, reminiscent of his Norwegian homeland. Here, he realized, was a place where a new life could be built. With his exile complete, Erik returned to Iceland not as a disgraced outlaw but as a visionary. To lure settlers to his discovery, he concocted the greatest real estate pitch in history. He named the land of ice and rock Greenland, knowing, as the sagas say, that people would be more tempted to go there if it had an attractive name. His marketing ploy worked. A fleet of 25 ships, carrying hundreds of men, women and children, sailed west to establish a new Norse nation, all born from an outlaw's ambition and a clever lie. In the twilight of the 10th century, the Byzantine Empire teetered on the edge of oblivion. A brutal civil war raged, and the rebel general Bardas Phocas had shattered the armies of Emperor Basil Sex. With his throne slipping from his grasp, Basil, in a moment of sheer desperation, cast his eyes north towards the lands of the Rus. A pact was forged in the crucible of war. Basil dispatched an envoy to Vladimir the Great, Prince of Kiev, with an unprecedented offer: 6,000 elite Russian warriors in exchange for the hand of his own sister, Anna Porphyrogenita. Soon a fleet of Viking Longships sliced through the waters of the Bosphorus, bearing a cargo of the fiercest warriors the world had ever known. At the Battle of Abydos, these Norsemen, the Varangians, were unleashed. Wielding massive double-headed axes, they crashed into the rebel lines like a tidal wave of steel and fury. Their terrifying charge was unstoppable, a whirlwind of destruction that smashed the rebellion and secured Basil's reign. Their loyalty, bought with gold and sealed in blood, had saved the empire. Profoundly impressed by their prowess and deeply wary of his treacherous nobility, Emperor Basil II made a revolutionary decision. He dismissed his native Byzantine guards and established these foreign mercenaries as his permanent personal protectors. The Varangian Guard was born. Imagine the scene. Within the sublime gold-drenched expanse of the Hagia Sophia, the heart of Eastern Christendom, stand silent, colossal figures. Clad in imperial armor, their hands rest on the hilts of their great axes. These Varangians, a stark and barbaric presence in this most sacred of spaces, were an unambiguous message to all who would dare challenge the throne. For centuries, these incorruptible axe-wielding giants would remain the ultimate symbol of imperial power, the loyal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors. 5 centuries before Columbus, the first European steps onto a new continent were not driven by kings or empires, but by the echoes of a lost sailor's tale. In the rugged Norse colony of Greenland, Leif Erikson, son of the infamous Erik the Red, was captivated by stories from a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson. Years earlier, a fierce storm had blown Bjarni's ship off course, revealing a mysterious forested coastline to the west, a land he saw but never dared to touch. Consumed by curiosity, Leif resolved to chase this shadow on the horizon and see the unknown land for himself. Around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson purchased Bjarni's well-traveled ship, gathered a hardy crew of 35 men, and steered his longship west into the vast, uncharted Atlantic. With Bjarni's vague descriptions as his only map, he retraced the merchant's accidental voyage in reverse. Their journey led them first to a desolate shore of rock and immense glaciers. Finding it inhospitable, Leif named it Helluland, the land of flat stones. Undeterred, they continued south, soon discovering a second, more promising coastline covered in dense, dark woods, which he aptly named Markland, the land of forests. Pressing further south, they finally discovered a third land that defied all their expectations. Their Viking longship glided into a sheltered cove, revealing a world of impossible richness. The coastline was a vibrant, deep green, with rolling hills and lush forests far grander than the sparse landscapes of Greenland or Iceland. The air was mild and the rivers teemed with salmon larger than any they had ever caught. To their astonishment, wild grapes grew in tangled abundance, a treasure completely unknown in their northern homeland. Leif and his crew stepped ashore, becoming the first known Europeans to set foot in North America. Stunned by the overwhelming bounty surrounding them, Leif named this paradise Vinland, the land of wine. They established a small settlement of turf-walled houses and spent the winter there exploring its resources. Nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus would make his famous voyage, these Norse explorers had already reached the New World, a monumental achievement long preserved in Viking sagas and later confirmed by the archaeological discovery of their camp at Lanceau Meadows in Newfoundland, forever proving that the Age of Discovery began not with a Spanish fleet, but with a single Viking ship. In the flickering firelight of a sacred grove, a Viking shaman chants ancient words, offering a sacrifice to Odin and Thor. He prays for victory in the coming raid, for the strength to crush their enemies. For centuries, this was the way. The old gods demanded blood and valor, and the Norsemen paid them in full, their faith as hard and unforgiving as the northern lands they called home. Yet the world of the Vikings was not sealed off. Through waves of raiding and the intricate webs of trade, they encountered a different kind of power. The Christian kingdoms of Europe were wealthy, organized and unified under the banner of the cross. Ambitious kings like Olaf Tryggvason of Norway saw this new religion not just as a path to salvation, but as a potent tool to forge a single powerful nation from scattered clans and competing jarls. The transition was a battle of its own, fought with both sermons and swords. We see brave missionaries, armed only with their faith, preaching the word of Christ in villages still loyal to the old ways. But we also see a harsher truth: newly converted Viking kings, their zeal matched only by their ambition, forcing baptism upon their subjects at the point of a blade. For many, the choice was simple: accept the new god or meet the old ones in Valhalla sooner than planned. Imagine this. A powerful jarl, a veteran of countless battles, stands waist-deep in a freezing river. His warriors, a formidable shield wall on the bank, watch with a mixture of suspicion and awe. A priest's Latin prayer cuts through the cold air as holy water is poured over the chieftain's head. In one hand, the jarl grips his heavy iron sword, the symbol of his past. In the other, he holds a simple wooden cross, the emblem of his future. This single act of baptism, repeated across Scandinavia, was more than a personal conversion. It was a profound political and cultural shift. It signaled the dawn of a new era and the twilight of the Viking Age. The old world of gods and giants began to fade, absorbed into a new Christian order. This merging of two worlds is perfectly captured in a single artifact, a runestone, where the coils of a traditional Norse serpent are forever intertwined with, and ultimately dominated by, a large, triumphant Christian cross. The year is 1016. England, a land bled by decades of Viking raids, now faces its ultimate crisis. A full-scale Danish invasion, led by the formidable young Prince Canute, seeks to conquer the realm. Standing against him is the new English king, the heroic Edmund Ironside, a fierce warrior fighting a desperate battle to save his ancestral kingdom from the storm of the north. The fate of England is decided on the bloody field of Asandun. The clash of shield walls is a maelstrom of steel and slaughter. Edmund Ironside fights with the strength of 10 men, his courage a beacon in the chaos. Yet valor is not enough. A treacherous English ealdorman, Edric Streona, flees the field with his men, shattering the Saxon line. The result is a crushing Danish victory, leaving England's hopes seemingly broken. But Edmund is wounded, not defeated. The two rival kings, the Saxon and the Dane, meet on an island in the River Severn to forge a peace. They agree to partition the kingdom. Edmund will retain the traditional English heartland of Wessex, while Canute will rule the vast territories to the north. It is a kingdom divided, a temporary truce born from mutual exhaustion and respect. Months later, a shadow falls over the land as Edmund Ironside dies under mysterious circumstances. By the terms of their treaty, Canute, the foreign conqueror, becomes the undisputed king of all England. In the Great Hall at London, the Danish prince sits upon the ancient throne. A magnificent crown, blending Saxon geometry with Norse dragons, is placed upon his head, symbolizing the union of two warring peoples under a single, powerful ruler. Canute would not rule as a tyrant, but as one of England's most effective kings. He secured the borders, revived the laws, and ushered in an era of peace and prosperity. The once feared Viking warrior became a revered monarch, forging a vast North Sea empire that united England, Denmark, and Norway, and forever changing the course of history. From the mists of exile, a king returned, his crown stolen, his faith his only shield. Driven from his throne by rebellious nobles and the might of the Danish king Canute the Great, Olaf II of Norway landed on his native shores in 1030 AD. With him was a small army of loyalists and foreign mercenaries, not to conquer, but to reclaim what was his. His mission was twofold: to win back his kingdom and to complete its conversion to Christianity, a task he had pursued with an iron fist. But the army that gathered to meet him was not a foreign invader. It was a vast host of his own countrymen, Norwegian chieftains and free farmers, infuriated by his harsh rule and his relentless war against their ancient pagan beliefs, stood united against him. To them, Olaf was no rightful king, but a tyrant who sought to extinguish their traditions and freedoms under the singular banner of the cross. The stage was set for a conflict that would pit Norwegian against Norwegian. On July 29, 1030, at a farm called Stiklestad, the two forces collided. It was a brutal, desperate civil war. Olaf's smaller, more disciplined force fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves, but they were hopelessly outnumbered by the great peasant army. The clash of steel and the cries of the dying filled the air as brothers and kinsmen cut each other down in a tragic struggle for the soul of Norway. In the swirling chaos of the melee, King Olaf was cut off from his men. He fought valiantly, but his enemies closed in. An axe blow crippled his knee. A spear thrust pierced his stomach. Finally, a mortal strike to his neck sent him falling lifeless against a large stone. As the king breathed his last, the sun itself seemed to mourn. A solar eclipse cast an eerie twilight over the blood-soaked field, an omen that would echo through the ages. Yet in death, Olaf achieved a victory that eluded him in life. The victorious chieftains soon found Danish rule far more oppressive than Olaf's had ever been. A strange nostalgia for their fallen king began to grow, fueled by reports of miracles at his burial site. The tyrant they had slain was soon revered as a martyr. He became Saint Olaf, the eternal king and patron saint of Norway. His defeat at Stiklestad, ironically, sealed the final triumph of Christianity in the land, forever closing the chapter on the age of the old gods. History is not just a record of grand strategies and shifting borders. It is a tapestry, woven from moments of individual, earth-shattering courage. In late September of 1066, the Viking army of King Harald Hardrada savored their recent victory near a river crossing called Stamford Bridge. The day was unexpectedly warm, prompting many Norsemen to leave their heavy mail armor with their ships miles away, opting instead for the comfort of the sun. They were relaxed, victorious, and completely unprepared for what was to come. Suddenly, a blinding glare on the horizon heralded an impossible arrival. It was the English king, Harold Godwinson, and his army. They had achieved a legendary forced march, covering nearly 200 miles in just 4 days. The gleam was the sun catching thousands of helmets, a tide of steel rushing towards the surprised and ill-equipped Vikings. As panic erupted, one warrior stepped forward to forge a legend. To buy his king precious time to form a battle line, a single Viking of gigantic stature took his post in the middle of the narrow wooden bridge. Wielding a fearsome Dane axe, he became an unbreakable one-man shield wall against the entire English host. The English charged, but the lone berserker was a whirlwind of death. He met their advance with terrifying fury, cutting down soldier after soldier. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle claims he single-handedly slew up to 40 men, their bodies piling up on the bridge and choking the river below. The advance of the English army was brought to a dead halt by his solitary heroic stand. Frustrated and unable to break through, the English devised a cunning, desperate plan. One soldier, hidden in a small boat, floated beneath the bridge. He thrust his spear upwards through the wooden planks, mortally wounding the giant from below. With a final roar of pain and defiance, the hero staggered and fell. His sacrifice, however, was in vain. The English army surged across, shattering the Viking force and slaying King Harald Hardrada. The Battle of Stamford Bridge marked the bloody end of the Viking Age. This is the story of the nameless Viking berserker, whose final stand at Stamford Bridge serves as a timeless testament to the power of a single warrior's will against impossible odds. The story of October 1066 is one etched in blood, sweat, and bitter irony, a tale that marks the violent end of an era. Fresh from their stunning victory at Stamford Bridge, where they had just shattered the last great Viking invasion of England, King Harold Godwinson's army stood weary but triumphant. But as the cheers faded, dire news arrived from the south. William, the ambitious Duke of Normandy, had landed his own formidable army on the English coast, ready to claim the throne for himself. What followed was a feat of incredible endurance. King Harold force-marched his exhausted soldiers over 240 miles, a desperate race down the length of England. They were marching to confront a fresh, well-equipped Norman force, a challenge that would test the very limits of their strength and loyalty. On October 14, 1066, the two armies met near Hastings. The English formed their legendary shield wall atop a strategic hill, a near-impenetrable barrier of wood and steel. For an entire day, they withstood everything the Normans threw at them: relentless cavalry charges, infantry assaults, and punishing volleys from archers. The fate of England hung by a thread, but as the day drew to a close, a stray arrow arced high over the battlefield, striking King Harold in the eye. The loss of their king shattered the English morale. The seemingly unbreakable shield wall faltered and then collapsed, turning the tide of battle into a brutal slaughter. The sun set on a field of carnage, a testament to the day's brutal struggle. Saxon round shields lay shattered beside Norman kite shields. Broken Dane axes were strewn amongst fallen banners. And in this ruin lay the ultimate historical irony. The Viking Age did not truly end with a Viking defeat, but with a Viking victory. For the Normans, the Northmen were themselves descendants of Viking raiders who had settled in France. By conquering England, these sons of Vikings closed the book on the Anglo-Saxon world, ending centuries of raids and exploration. A new era, one of stone castles and armored knights, had dawned,